I would like to start this presentation by saying that I've done this presentation for some horticultural societies around the Montreal region in the past. I am not a gardener, so I apologize right off the top for any of the references to certain types of plants and things like that, where any of you who are gardeners will know more about those than I do. I've gathered a lot of information from different sources to put this presentation together, and can certainly more experienced on the bird side than I am on the garden side, but it worked out quite well with the horticultural societies where we were able to sort of feed off of each other with this presentation. So I think you'll find it helpful, and we will give you information at the end of how you can access notes pertaining to this presentation that you can use to go back and refer to after we're completed. There's quite a bit of text in this presentation, so you might want to get a copy of the notes afterwards, and Catherine will give you information, or Ben will give you information on that at the end of the webinar. So we'll get going. Ben introduced me. I am with Bird Protection Quebec. I'm the Vice President, Treasurer, and one of the field trip leaders in the organization. Also have a couple other hats in the organization as well. Bird Protection Quebec is the oldest birding and conservation organization in the province of Quebec. We have been around since 1917, so we are 103 years old. And one of our keys, in addition to all our bird watching, is that we are a conservation organization, and we have many properties that we own in the province of Quebec that are bird sanctuaries. We've been doing conservation in Quebec since before many people knew what conservation was all about. So we're quite proud of what we do, and we're kind of unique in that respect as well. So anyways, let's get on to bird-friendly gardening. And the subtitle here is 10 Secrets to Make Your Garden Bird-Friendly. So we'll get moving here. So we're going to talk, some people have the luxury of having big properties. If you live out in the country, maybe on a farm, what have you, you've got a lot of space. A lot of people, though, in town and cities and condos, whatever, sometimes don't have very much space. So some of this presentation is going to focus on making the best of the space you have available as well, in order to attract birds to your property. Some of you will get them naturally, others you're going to have to work at it a little bit. So one of the ways to work at it is by following some of these guidelines as we go along. So attracting birds to your garden is easy in most cases. It doesn't matter if you live on a farm, or in an apartment in the country, or in a city. Anyone can attract birds to their property given a little pleasurable work and some ingenuity. So step number one, start thinking like a bird. And in a garden, a bird needs the following. It needs food and water. It needs shelter, which is dual purpose, either from weather or from predators. And in some cases, nesting opportunities. You may not only get birds visiting your yard, passing through, looking for food, but if you have the right sort of habitat, you may also get birds coming in to nest in your property as well. So we see some male and female cardinal down here at the bottom, blue jays. These are common yard birds that we see quite often. We'll see some others as we go along. So number two, and you see a couple of garden samples down in the pictures below, use 3 levels of vegetation to blend great design with great bird habitat. We like to mix up our yard a little bit, have different types of things in it. Well, so the birds enjoy that as well. The mixed environment pleases both birds and people. So they talk about 3 levels with this mixed environment, and we'll go into those in a little more detail as we go along. But there are birds that prefer different heights and different levels of a property as well. Some ground feeding birds, some that like the lower shrubs and bushes, and others that like the tall trees. So we've got different levels involved in there, which we'll talk about as we go along, incorporating. If we have the space and the ability to incorporate all 3 of those levels, will certainly increase your probability of attracting birds. Number 3, start with a base of low to the ground design elements. As they say, it's okay to start at the bottom in a garden. So ground cover plants. Birds need somewhere to skulk when life seems threatening, or a place to find tasty food such as insects and seeds. So most of that's going to be the ground feeding birds. Sparrows, different types of sparrows. You'll see grackles coming into the ground. If you're in the town, in the city, sometimes you have pigeons come in, mourning doves, other types of birds that are going to feed predominantly on the ground. Logs and rocks. Add rocks to provide a place for birds to perch. If you have some firewood, or you've got some old, now we should say one thing here. Some people like to keep really immaculate gardens, everything in its proper place and perfect, perfect look. In many cases, people that attract birds or trying to attract birds to their garden do the exact opposite. They like to leave it kind of scruffy and a little rough around the edges, and that tends to attract birds a little bit more. So they're talking about things like adding rocks to the surface, old logs or old wood in a wildlife garden, and lawns as well. Robins and flickers, which is a large woodpecker, they like to come in on the grass. They get their food from the grass in many cases. Juncos, most sparrows on the ground as well. They like the grass lawns. There are insects crawling around in the grass that they like to eat. Some grass is fine, but not too much, and try not to cut it shorter than absolutely necessary. Again, a little thicker, they tend to like that a little more, and they can find a little more in it in the way of food. The birds, though, do feel exposed when they're out in the garden, and exposure to predators. Cats, for one thing. Raptors, we have especially in town now, in Montreal and very suburban areas, we have things like merlins. We have things like Cooper's hawks. These are birds of prey, and they will come and try to catch small birds that you may have attracted to your gardens. So this will get us into the shelter that your garden can provide for the birds as well. So here you see some examples of some different types of gardens. Some of them you can see are very small, but they've still done what they can to try to attract the birds. A bird bath is a good thing to do. You see some different types of hanging pots and plants. You can put different types of feeders in this environment as well. This type up in the top left, the thicker, brushy types of gardens are really popular with birds. As we said earlier, it gives them a great place to hide and shelter from weather and from predators. It also can provide some different types of food for them as well. And you see there's a bird bath in here as well. Water is a key element for the birds as well. So there's some nice examples of not large gardens, but very productive gardens and nice looking gardens as well, with a wide variety of vegetation in them. Adding mid-level layers of shrubs or bushes. You see a bird sitting in the midst of this plant here. I don't know what this plant is. Some of you probably do. Not just beautiful to look at, but they provide feathered garden visitors a perch to look out from and shelter from inclement weather. Use plant species that start the year covered in flowers and end with a crop of berries. Any type of plants that do produce edible berries for the birds would certainly help in attracting birds to your gardens as well. So you'll see the connections are sort of going to run through this whole presentation of food and water and shelter are the three things that are going to be the key elements to your garden being friendly for the birds. Number 5 is looking up at the higher level. Trees add beauty to please the gardener and offer built-in features that will make the birds happy. Small young trees make your garden more attractive to birds, and over the years they'll mature into very large trees. And the trees, again, not only shelter, places to nest are important as well. And you get a lot of birds that just like to sit up in the trees and sing in the trees, give you some good observation points to be able to see them. Different species build nests at different heights as well. You may get some birds nesting in the low bushes that you've put in. shrubs, cedar bushes, things like that, that give them protective cover. But other birds will go up quite high into the trees to make their nests. Things like Baltimore orioles, for example. They make like a hanging pouch right out on the end of a long skinny branch off of a high tree. Very obvious to see their nests, but they're out at the end of very spindly little branches so that it's kind of hard for predators to get to them. Once you get thick trees like you see in the picture here, you may have a lot of birds inside here, either nesting or just sheltering themselves from the heat in some cases as well. They can provide shade for birds. When it gets super hot outside, some of the birds do look for cover at certain times of the day, particularly during the hottest periods of the day. So big trees can be very helpful for that. This would suit me just fine because I'm basically lazy when it comes to doing anything outside in the garden other than cutting the grass. So birds love a messy garden. And as it says here, nothing says welcome like an old log. So scruffy corners of the yard where they can go and dig around and rummage around and find food to eat, insects and things like that. They don't usually like really tidy gardens. If you don't mind leaving certain piles of leaves and twigs, especially during the winter, when the spring comes, that stuff that you've left on the ground over the winter is a great incubation source for insects underneath it. If you've left leaves over the winter and in the spring you go out and turn them over, you're going to see that it's very soggy and wet underneath. And there's lots of insects under there that the birds are going to be able to find and feed themselves, particularly in the spring. In woodlands, for example, fallen wood occurs naturally, and in many cases they don't clear it away. It's great for woodpeckers. Old trees, old logs tend to produce a lot of insects in them, so that attracts woodpeckers. Plenty of wildlife make their home in dead wood as well. Certain types of birds bore into trees or logs and make a cavity, and they can nest inside there. They recommend putting the logs in a shady spot so that it remains cool and damp, and leave a corner unraked in the fall to promote insect life, as we mentioned earlier. Don't cut the heads off of seed-bearing flowers before the winter. The birds will come and feed on those seeds in leftovers on those plants as well. So this is where the gardening side comes in. You have to learn. What I don't know is which of the plants produce those types of seeds and whatever. So the gardening people who are with us today will know more about that than I will. But anything that's producing a type of seed on them, if you can leave those on the plants, your birds will come to look for easy food as a source from those plants. Don't forget the importance of shelter is number 7. Birds won't visit if they don't feel safe. So add some sheltering elements. These could be a number of different things. They could be natural, or they could be adding shelters, man-made shelters, different types of feeders, bird houses, roosting boxes as opposed to nesting boxes. Lots of different types of shelter that you can provide for them. Low hedges, brush, old tree stump, big oak trees, any type of big trees. I find one that's particularly popular with a lot of birds are cedar hedges or cedar bushes and cedar trees. Once they get thick and full, it's really easy for birds to find nice cozy places inside those bushes. You'll often hear it walking down the street. If you have a hedge row of bushes, cedars, you'll hear a lot of birds inside. House sparrows love to gather inside those bushes. So you can see a nice, really nice setup here with a mixed garden and some feeders and some bird houses in there as well. So this would really be a nice place for birds to want to come and hang out. Provide birds with a choice of feeder and different food types. We've talked about this in a previous Learn presentation. If you go back to their YouTube channel, you can look at the one called Attracting Birds to and Feeding Birds. The right types of seeds for the right types of birds. Not all birds eat all types of seed. So you can mix and match the types of seed that you want to put out, the types of food in addition to seeds, be it peanuts, sunflower seeds, or what have you. And there are some specific types of feeders that are used for specific types of food as well. So you can look into this and see, you know, what types of food do you want to put out. And you can also, in addition to with the feeders, you can combine the feeders with a range of wild or natural foods. And birds really have a varied diet in many cases. You'll see insects, worms, larvae, eggs, rodents, and other birds. Those are the bigger birds. When they come in, birds of prey will look for smaller animals and birds. Add plants that provide seeds. You can put out berries. You can put out nectar in things like oriole or hummingbird feeders, and different types of flowers that are going to attract different types of birds as well. Excuse me, as well. So we put out old fruit sometimes in a flat feeder. If you have some grapes left over that you're not going to finish yourself, they're starting to wilt a little bit, or you've got some old shriveled up apples, you can chop them up and put them outside. You could put out things like raisins, peanuts. You can put things like peanut butter, but not the processed kind. You'd have to use natural. Because there's a lot of additives in some food that you would not want to be giving to the birds, things, salt and high chemical contents and that sort of thing. So natural foods is the way to go. And you'll see that different birds will prefer different types of food. So there's quite a bit of stuff you can put out. There are things like suet as well that you can use. We recommend that not in the hot weather though, because it doesn't last long in heat. But you can put it out, particularly in the winter, because it provides body fat for the birds to help keep them warm in the winter. So suet is a good food that you can use as well. And number 10, the key ingredient is water. It's a surefire way to attract birds to your yard. We have a solar powered bird bath in our backyard. It's a conventional looking bird bath, but it has a solar panel in it with a little spout in the middle of it. And when the sun hits the solar panel, it causes the pump to pump water up through the spout. Now, the reason they do that is birds like moving water more than they like still water. So by creating a ripple in the water or some splashing sounds, it does attract the birds more easily. We don't have one, but we have a number of our members in our organization that are lucky enough to have big enough yards where they have ponds or little waterfalls in their backyard. And these are exceptionally good for attracting birds. They come in to drink and they come in to bathe as well. And particularly if you've got that little waterfall or pond nestled in with your garden with lots of food around, you've got a perfect little habitat to attract birds. Moving water, as they say, is a must-have feature to increase the range of species you're likely to see in your garden. If you have no room for a pond, in a small garden or even an apartment balcony, a container of water, such as an inverted garbage can lid or a bucket, might draw birds to it, especially if they can access the water by perching on the rim. Or if you have a flat surface, you can put some stones or twigs across it that they can perch on. To get to the water. Some will go right in though. Some will go right in and take baths and whatever as well. Bird baths range in price too. You can get really very basic, simple ones up to very elaborate ones. Some that can be hooked up to hoses and have pumps built into them. So there are a wide variety of different types of bird baths. Mostly big garden centers have a really good choice of them. So you can check out there as well, or you can just create something very simple in your own yard. But water is vital, absolutely vital. They will, rain catchers as well can be good. You can just put something out there and let the rainwater get in as well. You do have to keep your bird baths clean though. You have to flush them out regularly, and because they will bring a lot of garbage into the water sometimes, and you don't want, particularly standing water, you don't want to leave it there generating algae and potentially even becoming a place for mosquitoes and what have you to breed. So keeping it clean is really, really important, but water is definitely a must. Here you see some of the different types of bird baths that are available. This is the type that we have that's on, it's a glass bowl. It has a solar panel in the middle, and you can see a little spout in the middle. And as we put this in a sunny spot, and the water pumps up through the middle. This one down in the bottom corner here is one you can use in the winter and summer. It's a heated bird bath. And it has a plug and an element inside it. You can plug it in the winter, and it keeps it just slightly above freezing. So it keeps the water running. So birds will come and use this throughout the winter, mainly to get drinks. If it's not super cold outside, they may use it to bathe, but not so much in the winter. Mainly it's for water, for drinking. So those are quite common now. You can bracket them onto a railing or on your deck or what have you, and you plug it in, and it'll keep the water flowing throughout the cold winter. So that's a really neat device to have. Not very expensive either. And the other ones, as you see, they're quite a nice selection of them. So this is where we get into some of the gardening stuff that if you're gardeners, you'll know some of these and know more about them than I will. But these are what's recommended by some of the people who have purposely worked on this, of putting gardening and birds together. So the best trees, vines, and shrubs to plant for birds, a starters list. Looking at types of deciduous trees. I won't go through all the description of all of these, but you can see on the screen what type of food is provided by these types of plants, whether there's fruit on them or not, what sorts of birds you might attract to them, and would they provide nesting sites for birds. So we have mulberries, we have service berries. You can see some of the birds are similar with these. They both have fruits. The descriptions are there for you. The heights, as I said, all of this will be in the notes that I have available that you can ask for from Learn Quebec afterwards. So I won't go through them in great detail. Flowering dogwood tells you the season for them. Another fruit. Robins, bluebirds, thrushes, catbirds, cardinals, tanagers, grosbeaks, many others. It is also a nesting possibility in dogwood. Crabapple trees, we have one on our front lawn here. It's very popular. It provides fruit in the winter, actually. We see things like robins throughout the winter. A lot of people think we don't have robins in the winter, but we certainly do. And the dried fruit on some fruit trees is very attractive to birds in the winter. So things like blue jays and robins in particular will really come and find food there. If you're lucky enough to get things like finches and pine grosbeaks, you might have them coming to your crab apples as well. So they produce the flower buds, flowers, fruit, and seeds. So you're getting everything in one type of tree in a crabapple tree, for example. White oaks, fall fruiting, winter persistent fruits. They're large. They produce acorns every year, which, unlike other oaks, they provide acorns as food. Woodpeckers, jays, wild turkeys, grouse, wood ducks. They also provide nesting sites and cover or shelter for birds. So a white oak is a popular tree for birds as well, for many reasons. The coniferous trees, I mentioned some of these earlier. Eastern red cedars. A lot of these trees have cones on them, which provide some seeds and certain types of fruit. Also thick, heavy nesting sites and cover for some of the birds. Spruce trees, seed-bearing cones. Its evergreen needles are a good source of insects in the spring as well. So birds will come and poke around in those trees to find little insects. In the fall and winter, you may get things like crossbills and other seed-eating birds come to those trees. And in the spring, the migrating warblers will use them to look for insects, providing a lot of food for them. Different types of vines, wild grapes. If you're not trying to grow the grapes for yourself for wine purposes or whatever, the birds will certainly take care of them. They provide fruit eaten by more than 50 species of birds. And you see the list of the birds there. They are nesting sites as well, and they can provide nesting material, the bark that shreds off of them. Some birds will take that and use that in building nests. Virginia creepers, fall fruiting and winter persistent fruit. These can be tree climbing. They've got bright coloring on them. An important food plant for many bird species. They provide nest covers, nest sites and cover for the birds as well. Another wide variety of birds with those vines. Different types of shrubs, northern bayberry. I don't know if all of these plants are suitable to our climate. That's the one thing I can't confirm without knowing more about these. Again, gardeners out there will probably know more about this. Staghorn sumacs, providing fruits and seeds, and attracting, again, wide variety of different types of birds. Dogwoods and nannyberries and arrowwoods. These I really don't know much about. Deciduous shrubs, fall fruiting. They're hardy, fruit with high fat content. That's a good source of food for migrating songbirds in the fall. And the other one's large genus of easy to grow shrubs, white flowers in spring. A lot of flowers attract things, the hummingbirds and things like that especially. They produce red, yellow, blue, or black berries, which provides fruit to a number of birds as well. Winterberry, tolerant of wet conditions. Scarlet berries are important food for winter residents. So these are birds that stick around for the winter. Robins, bluebirds, we do see bluebirds in the winter sometimes, waxwings as well, providing food for them. So 12 ways to design a bird-friendly garden. And we'll just run through these. Some of them we've talked about. This is more like a refresher here. Recreate the layers of plant growth found in local natural areas. Select plants with an eye to providing nutritional food during different seasons. We're in an area obviously with the 4 seasons and we have birds around us all 4. So if you can balance some of your gardening out to provide something all year round, that's even better. Plant small trees and shrubs in same species clumps, so little gatherings of plants together provide good cover. Provide at least 1 clump of conifers. Spare a dead tree, a snag, if you have one in the yard for birds. Woodpeckers especially love dead trees where they can go and find insects in them. Leaf vines or leaf vines or plant them to grow vines if you want to add them. Limit the size of your lawn. I like that because then you don't have to cut as much grass. Avoid invasive non-native plants. We hadn't talked about that. This is a problem that we see in a lot of areas now. Non-native plants, invasive species that are getting into places like marshes and bogs and things like that, and even into some gardens and plant wooded areas and things like that. So try to avoid non-native plants. Most important, supply the source of water. If you want, you can provide nest boxes. Leave some stuff around, particularly in the fall, over the winter into spring, for leaf litter, as they call it, for the birds. And we didn't talk about pesticides, but try to avoid using them if possible. Don't use them at all if it's possible. It's really what you're trying to get from your garden, I guess. And if you're trying to balance between birds and gardening, you know, there's a lot of different things you have to try to weigh it out as to, you know, what's going to be more important to you. So those are, you know, some of the simple things that you can do. Some of them a little more complicated than others, but again, how much space do you have? How much do you care about the look of your garden? You know, do you want it pristine? Do you want it a little rough around the edges? If you're leaning towards birds, the roughness, the more natural look to the garden is probably best. If you're not so interested in a lot of birds, then you know you can go to the extent that you want in keeping it that perfect eye-pleasing garden for yourself. So they talk here about spring migrants and year-round residents are always looking for the last season's seeds. So please leave your garden messy. And this comes from an organization at the Nature Conservancy of Canada and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Seed heads left on dried flowering plants are a bird's paradise. Numerous North American songbirds eat seeds: finches, sparrows, chickadees, buntings, jays, nuthatches, blackbirds, grosbeaks, and more. One stop in a messy garden packed with dead seed-filled native flowers equals a smorgasbord for residents and migratory birds. So this is up to you. This is what you have to decide. If you don't want to, clean out the garden in the fall and not have to do it in the spring, then that's your option. But by leaving stuff there, you're certainly going to help the birds that are getting ready to leave in the fall, giving them some food before they take off. And when they return, they're really looking for food. They've used up a lot of energy during migration and are looking for fast, quick, easy food to replenish themselves when they come back in the spring. So if you have some stuff that you can leave behind, the birds will certainly appreciate it.
They were wondering if there's any flowers that could be planted to attract more birds.
Yeah, well, almost any flowers, particularly hummingbirds, certainly like certain types of flowers where they can go in and take nectar from the plants, from the flowering part of the plants. As far as particular types of flowers, again, I'd have to lean more on the gardening people as to what, exactly what types of flowers. I know a lot of people in our organization have these mixed gardens where they just put in like a whole slew of different types of flowers, and it seems to attract different types of birds to different types of flowers. Certainly flowering gardens are going to lead to, sometimes it's not only food either, but the birds can spread pollen just the way the bees do. By coming into flowering bushes and flower gardens, they can pick up pollen on themselves and transport that to other plants as well. So in effect, birds can do what bees do as well. So really, having lots of variety in different types of plants and flowering plants can work not just as a source of food, but can also have a dual purpose in that the birds don't realize they're doing it, but they are, fitting into the cycle of carrying on the pollination that goes on.
Great. And we have a comment here that trumpet-shaped flowers are the best for hummingbirds.
Yeah, that's true. Anything that they can, it has like a trumpet's a good description, that they can get inside. And I know there are many types of plants, flowers like that. Again, people could look them up and recommend different types. Unfortunately, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a real gardening guy, so I really don't know the names of. It's funny when we're out on birding trips and people are seeing flowers or certain plants or bushes, and they're sometimes asking the field trip leaders, do you know what this is? And we have to sort of say, hey, we have enough trouble identifying the birds, never mind the plants. But we do have a lot of our people who are really into gardening and plants, and they know the types of vegetation that they're seeing around us, especially if you get out too and you get into other habitats. If you get into marshes and wetlands and things like that, you're going to see other types of plants that you're not necessarily going to have in your garden, but there are natural plants out there in these different habitats that are going to attract birds to them as well. So you can learn by going to sites like that, particularly marshes, wetlands, things like that, seeing the vegetation that's there and seeing which birds match up with the different vegetation. That's kind of a nice little game you can play as well. This is talking about breeding of the songbirds. Spring starts with winter habitat. And the condition of winter habitat for migrating birds, it turns out, are a crucial part of their survival and reproductive success in the spring. Savanna sparrow, which is pictured, were studied in their wintering grounds of the southern United States. The birds turned out to be very sensitive to climatic change in their wintering habitats. In particular, their ability to access reliable food resources essential during long periods of cold and unusual weather influenced their breeding success. Gardens rich in shriveled fruit and abundant seed heads help these migratory birds survive not only winter, but aid in the spring breeding. So that goes back to leaving some of the stuff behind, particularly plant flowering heads that produce seed that can provide the birds that are working their way back in the spring with a good source of some food for them. The same is true for our year-round seed-eating birds. Bird feeders, especially those that are well maintained, are a popular hangout spot for birds in their wintering habitat. And a messy garden can provide a comparable, more natural foraging habitat. So winter, you will get a lot of activity in the winter as well. And you do see a lot of birds picking at different types of plants that are left. Now here they're talking about some flowers, goldenrods, asters, cone flowers, sunflowers, black-eyed Susans. If these species are native to your region and are not in your garden, consider adding them. So there's some flower species that they were talking about that people were asking about. And some of these plants, you may see they develop these what are called galls, swelling in the tissue of a plant created by insects, fungi, or bacteria. Many species of plants have these and play in the food chain in a unique and sometimes important way. Goldenrod's Gall story is something straight out of a science fiction movie. They go on to talk about these tumor-like structures are homes for incubating goldenrod gall flies, native wasps, or beetles. The flies lay their eggs on the emerging goldenrod plant in the spring. The eggs hatch into larvae that burrow down into the stem, creating a nutritious cavity to incubate until the spring when the adults emerge. Well, what's waiting for them when they emerge? The birds. Any insect-eating birds. These are the flycatchers, the vireos, the warblers, those sorts of things that will find the emerging insects coming out of these plants. So it's providing a natural source of food for them. And we've seen woodpeckers pecking at these things to get inside and get the food that's inside for them. And here we have the plot thickens. However, as all the insects are vulnerable to the non-discriminatory predation of hungry woodpeckers and chickadees harvesting on them, these larvae provide a protein and fat-rich treat in the middle of a resource-barren winter. So you see the woodpecker, as we were talking about, pecking away at those little balls that form on some of those plants. So how to encourage a messy garden? Leave the leaves on the property, allow the dried flower heads to stay, let the grass grow a little tall and some of it go to seed, build a brush pile, fallen branches instead of removing them, forget chemicals, leave any dead snags on your property unless they're in danger of falling down and damaging something, delay garden cleanup until spring, after several 50-degree Fahrenheit or 10-degree-Celsius days, which allows overwintering pollinators to wake up for spring and to move on. There you see some of the dried up stuff that you can leave behind in the fall and in through the winter. And it's quite amazing. I've seen some people that have gardens like this and they really attract a lot of nice birds to them in the winter months. It's kind of nice to have birds around you in the winter to liven things up a bit.
It's about bird baths, and she's asking whether there's an optimal range of size, diameter, and depth or height from the ground.
Not particularly height. The depth is fairly shallow, though. They don't. If you see all of the different models, they're only I'm just going to say like a couple inches deep. Most birds will walk into them. Their feet will actually be touching the bottom in most cases. So the depth is not very, very deep at all. And they do walk into it, and that's where they take their baths. They just kind of flutter around and sort of sink themselves down a little bit. They don't submerge. I mean, we're not talking, diving birds into the water like ducks or whatever. So it's fairly shallow. The height is not really important. We have our heated one is up on the railing of our deck, so it's up, fairly high off the ground. The solar powered one is down, in the backyard. It's, I don't know, maybe a meter or so off the ground, I guess. So no, the height is not really that important. The diameter also not really important. It's more depth than anything else. And most of them you'll see are shallow for the birds to be able to walk through them quite easily and to sit up on the edges of them to drink.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, we're just about through on the slides here, I believe. So we'll look at these last couple. This one for those that experience regional snowfall. Did you know some people actually garden to ensure a pleasing winter garden view? So entails selecting plants with colorful and structurally resilient stems and seed heads built to stand up to snowfall. So this is really getting, advanced in really focusing your gardening on attracting the birds more than anything. They look nice as well, but they're really, thinking a lot about the birds and giving them something to enjoy in the winter months. That bird that you see there is a dark-eyed junco, a bird that we do see here every winter. Most of them have left now and gone back north. So here's our summary. You'll see that there are a lot of websites out there that can help you to create a bird-friendly garden. Now, this list will be included in the notes that Learn Quebec will have available for you. They'll be putting that together and it'll be made available to you so you can go and check out these different sites. These are actually live links, so I think the notes that I will be giving to them have the live links, so you just have to click on them. You'll see that these are active links. So those are all kinds of different resources. You may have to look at ones that are geographically suitable to you as well in our territory here. Some of them may apply to other areas that won't necessarily apply to us. So we have a lot of them there, and I'm sure there's more of them out there as well. So if you do want a copy of these, I had originally going to send them through me directly, but we've decided now that Learn will get the information and make it available to anybody that wants it. So that will be available to you.
Great.
And I want to just wrap up by saying a little bit more about our organization. If you want to find out more about us, you can email us with any birding questions, birdprotectionquebec@gmail.com. We invite you to visit our webpage, which is birdprotectionquebec.org. And our really active and interesting Facebook page is simply Bird Protection Quebec. Lots of photos, lots of great information there. People can post messages there, ask questions. It's a great resource for not just birders within our own organization, but birders in general who are using that Facebook group. So check it out. It's Bird Protection Quebec on Facebook.
Sheldon, I had a question about the bird feeders. I was wondering, those little ones that you see at places like the dollar store that are wooden and they're meant to be painted, are those actually good for the birds?
The problem with wooden bird feeders, you see some there, but they're made of a very soft wood, and they're not very weatherproof, for one thing. And secondly, they will get chewed apart very quickly by squirrels. So we recommend bird feeders that are metal or very, very hard, rigid plastic. There's a brand that we particularly recommend. They're called Squirrel Busters. They're not cheap bird feeders, but they're very durable. You can probably keep a Squirrel Buster feeder for many, many years, where if you were buying plastic, cheap plastic or wooden ones, they're probably not going to even last you a year, because once the squirrels get on them, they're gonna destroy them. They also may not be really good at protecting the seed that's in them from water and moisture. So, you know, those really inexpensive ones, the wooden ones, are probably not the best route to go. Simply, you know, bang for the buck, you're not really getting much from them at all.
And is that the same? Do the same rules apply for the little like nest boxes?
The nest boxes, not so much. I mean, they're mostly wooden boxes. There is always the possibility of a nest box of a squirrel or sometimes even other birds trying to get in and steal eggs or even steal baby birds from nests. That we see that happen with some types of nest boxes. You know, it depends. I mean, most people put up a nest box and you'll get things like sparrows go into them, or maybe starlings, things like that. But there are different types of birdhouses you can get for different types of birds as well. It's mainly the size of the hole that's different on some of them, and the design, the shape of the certain types of birdhouses. It's another thing that you really need to sort of look at, you know, and study a little bit more about them as to what type of house you might want to put up and where you want to put it, how accessible it is to predators, that sort of thing. It's a tricky thing. You know, some people have had good success with I know out on farms you see people, and we've done it up at Mount Royal Cemetery as well. Our organization installs bluebird boxes. And we've been very, very successful up at Mount Royal Cemetery with bluebirds, with tree swallows, and with house wrens using nest boxes up there. Getting them into your yard is tricky. It's not often successful. You probably have much more success with birds building their own nests in trees and shrubs and bushes and that sort of thing.
Great tips. Thank you.
And I noticed there's a number of different comments, a story about how a bear carried off their squirrel buster. If there's any stories that you like to tell, just let us know and we'll unmute you.
Yeah, there's a lot of those things on YouTube that you can see. I know somebody in the Adirondack Mountains that has a lot of feeders, and they're up quite high in the mountains. And they have you know, these little nursery room monitors where if you have a baby, you have a microphone in one room and a speaker in the other so you can hear what's going on in the nursery. Well, she took one of those and put the receiver outside around her bird feeders and had the receiver inside the house so she could listen to bird songs and whatever and know when there were birds at the feeders or in the yard so she could, you know, go and check what they were or identify them by the sounds that she was hearing. Well, one day she heard this just horrendous racket going on at the bird feeders and just like things banging around, didn't know what was going on, and went to her window and looked outside, and there was a black bear just like, you know, rummaging through the bird feeders like you wouldn't believe. So yeah, that was kind of funny. You know, but that can happen if you're really out in the wild somewhere and you know, in a remote area. She has deer come in regularly and you know, all kinds of creatures. That's the other thing with feeders, you know, is that you may attract other types of creatures that you may not want, particularly with seed, you know, that may fall on the ground. We have rabbits here. I'm on the South Shore in Greenfield Park. We have rabbits. We have a groundhog that lives under the caban in our next door neighbor's yard. We've had skunks. You could attract nasty things that you don't want. We don't have raccoons around us, but I know many places that do. I've only seen a raccoon here once in like 30 some odd years, or we seem to be not favorable for raccoons around here. But mice, rats, voles, which are little tiny weasel type creatures. You know, some of those things can be attracted if you have a lot of food. If you put food outside, you need to sort of keep your area clean a little bit, you know, every once in a while, just clean up under the feeders a little bit. Ground feeding birds will clean up some of that for you, but if you have like sunflower seeds and you'll have all the shells and what have you on the ground, you might, you know, clean that stuff up. It can get moldy as well if it's left on the ground for too long. Some of the stuff you can mulch it after too if you have composting. So there's lots of different things you can do to, sort of combine your garden and your lawns and your surroundings to sort of coexist with the birds, but always remembering that you may attract some other things as well. Hummingbird feeders, I should mention that because it's more of a safety thing than anything else. Hummingbirds are attracted to the hummingbird feeders where you put nectar in them. If you have anybody in your home that's allergic to yellow jackets, wasps, or bees, or that sort of thing, usually hummingbird feeders will not only attract hummingbirds, but they may attract a good number of those stinging insects. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. And one rule that I tell everybody about birds in general, and we really stress this with the kids in the school projects we're working in, do not in any way, shape, or form feed any types of birds bread of any kind. White bread, whole wheat bread, any kind of bread products whatsoever. Do not put bread scraps out for birds. It is very bad for them. It is not nutritious for them in any way. And it has in examples of birds being brought to Le Nichoir, the rehabilitation center in the West Island, it has been deadly to some species of birds. So please, please, please remember that. Do not put any types of bread products out for birds. We started these things to provide people some information, but some entertainment as well, and something to help pass the time in these rather difficult and challenging times we're going through right now. One last thing about Bird Protection Quebec. Once things do get back to normal, and hopefully that will be sooner than later, we organize a weekly field trip. They're suspended right now, of course, except we are doing something unique called virtual field trips, which you can find out more about on our Facebook page and our webpage. But normally speaking, we are out on a field trip every Saturday morning, year round, right through all 4 seasons. And our field trips are a different location every Saturday. They're open to anybody who wants to attend. All of the instructions and details about them appear every week on our webpage and on our Facebook page. You can also get direct emailings by registering with us to get those emails and notices. So when we get back to regular field trips, everybody is welcome to participate. There's no charge for them. We give you the location. There's a leader on each trip. We give you the instructions on how to get to the location. I should mention we do not provide carpooling or transportation. That's all up to you. But you're more than welcome to attend. And of course, our organization is a not-for-profit charitable organization. There is a membership fee, which is tax deductible, and membership dues are used for our conservation efforts. They help us to take care of our properties that we preserve and protect for birds. They help us to do education projects and other activities involved in bird protection and conservation. So you can find out more about us on our webpage, and we more than welcome any new members to our organization.